In January of 2014, 18-year-old Justin Back was living with his family in Waynesville, Ohio. He had graduated from high school the previous year and was preparing to enter the United States Navy. Like many recent graduates, he was looking ahead to the next chapter of his life. There was nothing unusual about the morning of January 28th, and no reason to believe it would be his last day alive. Justin had known Austin Myers for years. The two had attended the same middle school and had been friends during 7th and 8th grade. Although they had grown apart over time, Austin was still someone Justin recognized and trusted enough to invite into his home. That familiarity would become one of the most important parts of what happened next. Austin had recently begun spending time with another young man named Timothy Mosley. According to Timothy's later statements, Austin approached him with an idea to make some easy money. Austin believed Justin's stepfather, Mark Cates, kept a safe inside the family home containing a handgun and around $20,000 in cash. Whether that amount was ever based on fact or simply a rumor, Austin was convinced the safe was worth stealing. The two first drove to Justin's house, intending to burglarize it while no one was home. When they arrived, however, they realized Justin was inside. Rather than give up, they drove away and began discussing another option. If Justin was there to identify them, they believed they would have to eliminate him first. According to investigators, Austin suggested killing Justin and staging the scene to make it appear that he had stolen the safe himself before disappearing. To prepare, Austin purchased a length of steel cable and metal rope cleats. Together, he and Timothy assembled the materials into a homemade garrote, planning to use it the following day. On the morning of January 28th, they gathered the rest of what they believed they would need. They bought rubber gloves, ammonia, septic tank cleaner, and septic enzymes before driving back to Justin's house shortly after 1 p.m. The plan was simple. Austin would distract Justin while Timothy attacked him from behind using the garrote. When Austin knocked on the front door, Justin welcomed both men inside without hesitation. For several minutes, nothing seemed out of place. The three talked casually inside the home, making the visit appear completely ordinary. Then Justin walked into the kitchen. As soon as he turned away, Timothy moved behind him and pulled the wire toward his neck while Austin grabbed him from the front. But the attack didn't go as planned. Justin fought back immediately, struggling hard enough that all three men fell to the kitchen floor. During the fight, the wire slipped across Justin's chin instead of tightening around his throat. Seeing the plan falling apart, Timothy abandoned the garrote and pulled out a pocket knife. He began stabbing Justin while Austin continued trying to restrain him. During the struggle, Austin repositioned the wire around Justin's neck as Timothy continued the attack. By the time it was over, Justin had been stabbed 21 times. Instead of fleeing, the two immediately began searching the house for the safe. They eventually found it inside a closet, but discovered it was locked. Austin also located Mark Cates' handgun and loaded it before the pair turned their attention back to the kitchen. Using the cleaning supplies they had purchased earlier that day, they attempted to clean portions of the crime scene. They wrapped Justin's body in a blanket, carried him outside, and placed him in the trunk of Timothy's car. They then continued searching through the house, taking jewelry, credit cards, clothing, and anything else they believed could support the idea that Justin had voluntarily disappeared. Around 2 p.m., they drove away with Justin's body hidden in the trunk and the stolen safe loaded into the car. As they traveled, Timothy became increasingly paranoid that another driver might be following them. He left the main road several times, stopping to check the outside of the vehicle for blood before continuing. The pair eventually arrived at Timothy's house, unloaded the stolen property, and changed their clothes. They still needed to dispose of Justin's body, eventually choosing a secluded field near the village of Gratis in Preble County. Carrying him behind a fallen log, they left his body partially wrapped in the blanket before pouring ammonia and septic enzymes over it in an attempt to destroy evidence. According to Timothy's later confession, Austin then took the stolen handgun and fired 2 shots into Justin's body. When the weapon jammed on a third attempt, he cleared it and unknowingly left behind a live cartridge at the scene. One small mistake that investigators would later recover. Believing they still had plenty of time, the 2 left the field and focused on opening the safe. After buying a crowbar, they forced it open, expecting to find the fortune Austin had promised. Instead, the safe contained paperwork, loose change, ammunition, and miscellaneous items. The $20,000 they believed they had killed for simply wasn't there. Frustrated, they burned paperwork, bloody clothing, and other evidence in a backyard fire before throwing the empty safe into a river. They believed they had erased the most important evidence and scattered everything else across several locations. That afternoon, Justin's stepfather, Mark Cates, returned home from work and immediately noticed things weren't right. Furniture had been moved, rugs were missing, and after searching the house, he realized both his safe and handgun were gone. When the family couldn't find Justin, they tried calling him, only to discover his cell phone had been left inside the house. Police were called to investigate what first appeared to be a burglary and a missing person. As detectives interviewed neighbors, one detail stood out. Witnesses described a vehicle parked outside the house with a missing rear window covered by plastic and red tape. Mark immediately recognized the description. Austin Myers had driven that same car to the house the day before. Within hours, investigators had their first major lead, and the search for Justin was beginning to focus on someone who had once been his friend. Detectives quickly began searching for Austin Myers and the distinctive vehicle witnesses had described. The damaged rear window made the car easy to identify, and it wasn't long before officers with the Clayton Police Department located it parked outside Timothy Mosley's home. Austin was there when police arrived, and both young men were brought in separately for questioning. At first, neither admitted to knowing what had happened to Justin. Austin claimed he had no involvement in Justin's disappearance or the burglary at the house. After the initial interviews, both men were released from the station and taken back to Timothy's home, while detectives compared their statements and reviewed the evidence they had already collected. The more investigators looked at the timeline, the less their stories made sense. Detectives soon brought both men back for another round of questioning. This time, the pressure began to show. Austin eventually admitted he had been at Justin's house during the attack, but insisted Timothy had acted alone. He claimed he had no idea Timothy intended to kill Justin and said he had been shocked when the stabbing began. He also denied shooting Justin's body afterward, placing all of the blame on Timothy. While being held in neighboring cells, Timothy overheard Austin attempting to shift responsibility entirely onto him. Realizing Austin was trying to save himself, Timothy decided to tell investigators what had happened. He confessed to taking part in the crime and described how the burglary had been planned in advance. He admitted that both men had purchased the materials used during the attack and explained how they had disposed of Justin's body after leaving the house. His confession also pointed detectives directly to the location where Justin had been left. Faced with Timothy's statement, detectives questioned Austin once again. His story changed. This time, he admitted buying the steel cable, gloves, and cleaning supplies. He also acknowledged firing the gun into Justin's body after it had been abandoned in the field. Even then, he continued denying that he had actively restrained Justin during the attack, insisting he had been caught off guard once the violence started. Using the information they had been given, sheriff's deputies traveled to the remote field in Preble County. There, behind a fallen log, they found Justin's body exactly where Timothy had described. Nearby, investigators also recovered the live cartridge that had been ejected when the stolen handgun jammed, further connecting the scene to the suspect's statements. An autopsy later determined that Justin had died from multiple stab wounds. The examination confirmed the brutality of the attack and matched the details investigators had already begun piecing together through interviews and physical evidence. As the case moved toward trial, one aspect would attract national attention. Although Timothy Mosley admitted to using the knife during the attack, He accepted a plea agreement that resulted in a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Austin Myers, whom prosecutors argued had planned the crime from the beginning, was instead sentenced to death. On October 16, 2014, 19-year-old Austin Myers became the youngest inmate on Ohio's death row at the time. Less than a month later, Timothy Mosley received his life sentence and was sent to prison. The difference between the two sentences sparked widespread debate. Many questioned how the man who carried out the stabbing received life in prison, while the man prosecutors described as the planner received the death penalty. The discussion reached far beyond Ohio, bringing renewed attention to the case and prompting proposals for changes to the state's murder laws, including legislation that became known as Justin's Law. For Justin Back's family, however, no sentence could undo what happened on that January afternoon. An 18-year-old who had been preparing to begin a career in the Navy had instead lost his life at the hands of someone he had once considered a friend, all because of a robbery motivated by money that never existed. In February of 2013, 23-year-old Shandy Blackburn was living and working in the coastal city of Mackay, Queensland, Australia. It was an ordinary Saturday night, and after finishing her shift at work, she began the short walk home. Her house was only a few minutes away, and the route was one she had taken before. Just after midnight on February 9th, Shandy left work alone. Security cameras captured her walking along Boddington Street as she made her way through the quiet neighborhood. Nothing in the footage appeared unusual. The streets were calm, there was little traffic, and Shandy seemed unaware that someone was nearby. She was less than 100 meters from home when an attacker suddenly ambushed her. The assault was swift and extremely violent. Shandy was stabbed 23 times, suffering wounds to her neck, head, chest, and arms. Investigators later determined that the injuries to her arms were defensive wounds, showing she had fought desperately to protect herself during the attack. Despite her injuries, Shandy did not die immediately. Unable to speak because of severe wounds to her neck, she somehow managed to crawl toward the nearby gutter. She couldn't call for help, but her movements and faint sounds were enough to attract the attention of a nearby resident named Ringo Tapim. Realizing something was terribly wrong, he rushed outside and found Shandy critically injured. He immediately called emergency services, desperately trying to get help to her as quickly as possible. Paramedics arrived at approximately 12:26 a.m. and began treating Shandy at the scene. They fought to save her life before transporting her to the hospital, but despite their efforts, she was later pronounced dead. Queensland's Homicide Investigation Unit quickly took over the investigation, with Detective Scott Furlong leading the case. Investigators immediately began examining the crime scene and reviewing security camera footage from the surrounding area in hopes of identifying whoever had attacked her. The CCTV footage became one of the investigation's most important pieces of evidence. It showed Shandy walking alone in the minutes before the attack, helping detectives establish a timeline of her final movements. But the footage did not clearly capture the person responsible. As detectives worked to reconstruct the night, attention gradually shifted towards someone from Shandy's past. Her former boyfriend, John Peros, soon became a person of interest. Investigators began examining his movements, his relationship with Shandy, and whether there was any evidence connecting him to the attack. As the investigation continued, detectives believed they were building a case strong enough to bring before a court. More than a year after Shandy's murder, on September 4th, 2014, John Peros was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest appeared to be a major breakthrough, giving Shandy's family hope that justice might finally be within reach. But the case was far from over. As prosecutors prepared for trial, questions began to emerge about the strength of the forensic evidence. Although investigators believed they had identified the right suspect, proving it beyond a reasonable doubt would become far more difficult than anyone expected. When the trial finally began, the jury heard evidence placing suspicion on Peros, but no single piece of evidence directly linked him to the murder. After deliberating, the jury returned a verdict that stunned many following the case. John Peros was found not guilty. For Shandy's family, the decision was devastating. After years of waiting for answers, the man accused of killing her walked free. Although the criminal trial had ended, many believed the investigation itself was far from finished. In the years that followed, fresh questions about the handling of the evidence would emerge, eventually leading to renewed public attention, a major podcast investigation, and a coronial inquest that would once again place the entire case under the spotlight. Although John Peros had been acquitted in court, the case refused to disappear. Many investigators, journalists, and members of Shandy Blackburn's family believed there were still unanswered questions surrounding the murder. The verdict had ended the criminal trial, but it had not ended public interest in finding out exactly what had happened. Much of the attention soon shifted away from the suspect and toward the investigation itself. As the evidence was reviewed in the years that followed, concerns began to surface about the way forensic testing had been handled by Queensland's State Laboratory. Experts questioned whether important evidence had been properly examined and whether mistakes made during testing had affected the outcome of the trial. One former forensic biologist went as far as describing the laboratory's handling of the evidence as a forensic train wreck. Another expert, Dr. Christy Wright, later revealed that the laboratory had issued numerous incorrect forensic results in unrelated cases, raising broader concerns about the reliability of its testing procedures. For Shandy's family, those revelations were deeply frustrating. They believed the evidence should be tested again using improved methods, hoping advances in forensic science might uncover something that had been missed years earlier. Because Peros had already been acquitted, however, the legal situation had become far more complicated. Under Australian law, an acquittal cannot simply be retried because investigators remain suspicious. Any future prosecution would require significant new evidence capable of meeting strict legal requirements. In 2019, a coronial inquest was held to examine Shandy's death more closely. Unlike a criminal trial, the purpose of the inquest was not to determine guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but to examine the circumstances surrounding the death and the investigation itself. During the hearings, investigators revisited evidence collected years earlier. CCTV footage became a major focus once again, including images of a Toyota Hilux similar in age and color to one previously owned by John Peros. The vehicle had been captured near the crime scene only minutes before the attack. The inquest also heard witness testimony claiming that, at an earlier point, Peros had made a statement about wanting to stab Shandy. While that evidence had not resulted in a criminal conviction, it became part of the broader picture examined by the coroner. After reviewing the available evidence, Coroner David O'Connell delivered his findings in August 2020. Although Peros had been found not guilty at trial several years earlier, the coroner concluded that he was responsible for Shandy Blackburn's death. The finding did not overturn the jury's verdict, nor did it result in a new criminal conviction. Instead, it reflected the coroner's independent assessment after reviewing all of the evidence presented during the inquest. The case received even greater attention in late 2021 after journalist Hedley Thomas released the investigative podcast Shandy's Story. The series explored the murder in detail while also examining the forensic failures that had become a central issue in the investigation. The podcast reached a large audience across Australia and renewed public interest in the case. It also prompted wider discussions about the state's forensic laboratory and whether mistakes in other investigations may have gone unnoticed. The renewed attention led to another significant development. In February 2022, a second coronial inquest was opened to further examine both Shandy's murder and the concerns surrounding the forensic evidence. For her family, it represented another opportunity to seek answers nearly a decade after her death. Today, Shandy Blackburn's murder remains one of Australia's most widely discussed unsolved homicide cases. The criminal trial ended with an acquittal, yet later findings pointed to the same primary suspect. while ongoing questions about forensic testing continue to cast a shadow over the original investigation. More than 10 years later, the search for complete answers continues, not only about who killed Shandy Blackburn, but whether critical evidence that could have changed the outcome was missed from the very beginning. In October of 2015, 18-year-old Ebby Steppage was finishing her senior year of high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. She had recently transferred schools and, wanting more independence, had begun spending much of her time staying with friends and her grandparents instead of living at home. Like many teenagers her age, she was looking toward graduation and the future. On the evening of October 23rd, Ebby attended a party. The following day, she returned to her mother's house visibly distressed. She told her stepfather that something terrible had happened at the party. According to Ebby, she had been sexually assaulted by 4 men, and she believed the assault had been recorded on a cell phone. She wanted to report what had happened to police. Later that day, after leaving the house, Ebby's family struggled to reach her. Her stepfather believed she may have gone to recover the alleged recording before officially reporting the assault. Phone records would later show 2 brief calls were placed from Ebby's phone to the Little Rock Police Department that evening, although police later stated they had no record of receiving a report. Throughout the night, Ebby also exchanged text messages with several of the men she had accused. According to investigators, the messages included threats that she intended to go to the police. The following afternoon, October 25th, Ebby made what would become her final known phone call. Around 2 p.m., she called her older brother Trevor. Almost immediately, he realized something wasn't right. Ebby sounded confused and disoriented. She first told him she was parked outside his house. Trevor walked outside expecting to find her waiting there, but her car wasn't anywhere on the street. He called her back. This time, Ebby answered and said she was still sitting in her car but didn't know where she was. During the conversation, she told her brother, "I'm messed up." Moments later, the call ended. No one would ever speak to her again. 2 days later, on October 27, a security guard patrolling Shalamont Park noticed an abandoned 2003 Volkswagen Passat sitting in a parking lot near a wooded area. The vehicle looked out of place, so he contacted police and waited for officers to arrive. Hours passed. No one came. The following day, while making his rounds again, he found the same car still sitting exactly where it had been left. He called police a second time and waited once more. This time, officers eventually responded and determined the vehicle belonged to Ebby Steppage. Inside, investigators found the key still in the ignition. The battery was dead and the gas tank was empty. There was no sign of Ebby anywhere nearby. Search teams quickly began combing the wooded areas surrounding Shalamont Park. Officers searched through trees, brush, and nearby drainage areas, hoping Ebby had simply wandered away or was injured somewhere nearby. Despite repeated searches, nothing was found. As days turned into weeks, the investigation widened. Detectives interviewed the men Ebby had accused of assaulting her at the party. Each spoke with investigators, but according to later reports, their cell phones were never formally searched for the video Ebby had claimed existed. For her family, that became one of many frustrating questions surrounding the investigation. Months passed without any sign of Ebby. Then years. Her family refused to let her case disappear from public attention. They offered a $50,000 reward for information, appeared on national television, and continued pleading for answers, hoping someone would finally come forward with information about what happened after that final phone call to her brother. By 2018, nearly 3 years had passed since Ebby vanished. Her abandoned car had been found almost immediately, but Ebby herself had seemingly vanished without a trace. What investigators didn't realize was that the answer had been much closer than anyone ever imagined. Nearly 3 years after Ebby Steppage disappeared, investigators returned once again to Chalamont Park. The park had already been searched numerous times since her car was discovered there in October 2015. Officers, search teams, and recovery dogs had all worked through the area, believing that if Ebby had been nearby, they would have found her. But they hadn't. During one of the later searches in May 2018, police focused on a drainage pipe located not far from the parking lot where Ebby's abandoned car had been found years earlier. Inside the pipe, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Skeletal remains were found hidden within the drainage system, in virtually the same area that had been searched repeatedly since the beginning of the investigation. The remains were later identified as Ebby Stepach. Investigators determined she had died around the time she disappeared in October 2015. Her death was officially ruled a homicide. The discovery immediately raised difficult questions. How could her body have remained in the same general location for nearly 3 years without being found during so many organized searches? Those questions became even more troubling after accounts from volunteers and family friends began to emerge. Margie Foley, a close family friend whose daughter had been one of Ebby's best friends, later explained that while conducting a private search of Chalamont Park, she believed she smelled decomposition near the drainage area. Concerned, she alerted police and pointed them toward the location. According to Foley, her concerns were largely dismissed. She said officers told her the park had already been searched with recovery dogs and that the odor she noticed was probably from a dead animal. Believing the area had already been thoroughly examined, no immediate discovery was made. When Ebby's remains were eventually found in that same drainage pipe, many people began questioning whether crucial evidence had been overlooked from the very beginning. The investigation also continued to face criticism over its handling of the allegations Ebby made before she disappeared. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she had told her family she intended to report being sexually assaulted by 4 men at a party. She also believed the assault had been recorded on a cell phone, although the men she accused were interviewed during the investigation. Later reports stated that police never conducted formal searches of their phones for the alleged recording. For Ebby's family, that remained one of the most difficult aspects of the case. They believed important opportunities to gather evidence had been missed during the earliest stages of the investigation. Despite years passing, no one has ever been charged in connection with Ebby's death. Her case has been featured on national television and true crime podcasts, bringing renewed attention to the unanswered questions surrounding both her disappearance and the investigation itself. Each new documentary or interview has generated additional tips, but none have resulted in an arrest. Today, the killing of Ebby Stepach remains an unsolved homicide. The final phone call to her brother, the abandoned car left in Chalamont Park, and the discovery of her remains only a short distance away years later continue to leave investigators and the public searching for answers. For Ebby's family, the hope has never changed. They are still waiting for the person responsible to be identified and for the questions surrounding those final days in October 2015 to finally be answered. Alright guys, that will be it for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss next week's upload. I drop new stories every week, so there's always something coming. I'll see you in the next one.